Flames and smoke blanketed the battlefield. War banners fluttered. Soldiers stood at attention, awaiting divine orders. Then came the call to advance. The armies surged forward, human and orc forces charging with thunderous cries. On one side stood Nebula, the reigning champion for 11 months. On the other, Hegemony, his most dangerous rival yet. Each player's strategy had sculpted their people. Nebula's humans had progressed rapidly through technology, already deploying cannons and firearms. In contrast, Hegemony's orcs had taken a mystical path, empowering themselves through magic and sheer numbers. While it seemed the technologically superior humans should have the upper hand, the orcs' battle mages proved surprisingly effective, stopping cannon fire with arcane defenses. But Nebula had no intention of ending it there. His next move would change everything. Air power. A fleet of flying machines, armed and ready, soared into the skies, designed to wipe the enemy from the face of the world. Hegemony, however, was not so easily shaken. With a few swift inputs, he summoned a countermeasure from his magical arsenal. Thunder split the sky as bolts of lightning rained down, vaporizing aircraft in midair. Each skirmish was like a calculated chess move, demanding not just power, but foresight. As Nebula's civilization neared a World War II-era level of advancement, his options expanded. He'd reached the pinnacle of destructive capability: nuclear weapons. Confident in his planning and research, he decided it was time to end the game once and for all. The missiles launched. An overwhelming barrage of intercontinental warheads lifted off, streaking through the sky toward the orc homeland. Civilians below, unaware and unprepared, gazed up in terror. But Hegemony had anticipated this. Calmly, he asked Nebula over voice chat, "You didn't think I'd be unprepared, did you?" Then, with a divine gesture, he summoned a protective spell. Missile defense systems activated, intercepting the incoming warheads one after another in brilliant bursts of light across the sky. But Nebula smiled to himself. That too was part of his plan. While the defense grid scrambled to neutralize the main wave, Nebula launched a single, larger missile. It didn't follow the others. It soared high into space, beyond the arc of interceptors, before descending sharply. Its target, the orc capital. More specifically, the temple at its heart, where the emperor knelt in prayer. In any real-world scenario, a ruler begging for divine aid might appear foolish. But in perished world, faith was a tangible resource. While Nebula invested in technological research, Hegemony had built his strategy around cultivating worship. His followers provided him with the power of faith, a currency that allowed players to perform miracles. That's why he chose the orcs. They reproduced rapidly and generated vast amounts of faith, which he hoarded like a divine arsenal. As the missile streaked toward the temple, a surge of energy rose from the worshippers' prayers. Blue smoke swirled into the sky and condensed into an enormous spectral fist, a towering orc-like figure hundreds of meters tall, which caught the warhead in midair. Watching from his screen, Hegemony couldn't help but laugh. "In perished world," he told Nebula, "faith always pays off." Victory seemed inevitable. With such an endless well of devotion to draw from, Hegemony felt untouchable. Nebula just smiled. His rival's strategy, known in the community as the Holy Orc build, was effective, sure, but it was also predictable. "Can you see it yet?" Hegemony asked, grinning, his avatar standing beside the summoned orc guardian. Sunwoo didn't answer. He was still waiting for something interesting to happen. He proudly claimed that his new and improved Holy Orc strategy would secure him the win. As the second-ranked player on the server, he spoke with confidence and even suggested Sunwoo should save himself the trouble and just surrender. Watching his smug opponent laugh on the screen, Sunwoo suddenly understood why the guy had never made it to number 1. He was simply too arrogant. His strategy, though clever, wasn't flawless, and Sunwoo knew exactly how it worked. The orcs had been selected as the primary race, chosen for their ability to rapidly expand the population. As the number of believers grew, so did the reserves of faith, creating an overwhelming surge in resources. Science, culture, and tech were acquired the old-fashioned way: conquest. It was a solid strategy, earning praise from the player base for its aggressive efficiency. The swelling orc hordes and immense faith made them dominant in war, but Sun One had already prepared a counter. While orcs were easy to mass-produce, amassing so much faith early on was no easy task. That alone deserved some respect. Still, Sun One had selected the sky as his domain, the perfect battlefield for launching precision kinetic attacks. His opponent's decision to prepare a spirit apostle was commendable, but predictable. Sun One had been quietly stockpiling tech, and now it was time to unleash his trump card, a military satellite orbiting high above, powered by ancient relics and governed by AI. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense, just a platform armed with 10-ton tungsten rods. No explosives needed. As they descended from the upper atmosphere, they began slow, then accelerated with terrifying speed, glowing red-hot as they pierced the sky. His rival watched in disbelief, eyes wide, clearly not expecting this level of brutality. He cursed in frustration, helpless against this spaceborne assault. He commanded his holy orcs to shield the temple, desperate to protect the Emperor, but it was already too late. Sun One knew the truth. Nothing could stop those rods. Once they gained enough velocity, they hit with the force of nuclear weapons. The gravity-assisted strikes ripped through even the strongest defenses. The rod meant for the temple landed with a thunderous crash, obliterating the entire capital in one devastating moment. The imperial palace was reduced to dust. The Orc Emperor himself, despite layers of enchanted protection, was utterly destroyed, his staff of power falling to the ruins below. The underground temple collapsed, and with it, all the faith that had taken so long to build crumbled into nothingness. Without faith, the spells began to unravel, vanishing one by one. And when faith disappears, so do the apostles. Disoriented and powerless, his opponent's once mighty civilization unraveled. Holy orc apostles scattered, and chain reaction explosions tore through cities and infrastructure. One by one they fell like dominoes. In the end, the player had no choice but to surrender. Once again, Nebula was declared the victor. After the match, Sun One thanked his opponent for a good game. But the guy couldn't let it go. He begged for a rematch, swearing this time he'd win. Request after request popped up on Sun One's monitor, but he just shook his head and logged out. He couldn't understand why his rival dragged it out for so long. Maybe he thought he had a hidden ace, but if he did, it never showed. Still, the win meant something. Sun One had officially completed the 12-month achievement of staying ranked, a 1. Just as he was about to get some well-earned rest, a sudden notification appeared. At first, he assumed it was a late-night text, but when he clicked it, a stunning message popped up. He had officially completed every single in-game achievement. He was the first. The next message surprised him even more. The beta test was over. The game would soon launch to the public, but as a reward for his accomplishments, he was granted early access to the true version of the game. Intrigued and excited, Sun One didn't hesitate. When prompted to enter the game, he hit yes. Immediately, the world around him turned pitch black. He felt like he was falling through a digital void, binary code flowing past him like streams of light. At first, he thought he had blacked out, but his vision soon cleared. Above him stretched a starry night sky. All around, crumbling stone and glowing ruins formed what looked like a vast space temple. For a second, he thought it might all be a dream, especially since he looked exactly like his in-game avatar. But then, a soft voice spoke behind him, as if reading his thoughts. A woman stood there, cloaked and hooded, her face partially hidden in shadow. She addressed him by his player name, Nebula, and assured him it was not a dream. She introduced herself as Alden. Sunwon's first instinct was to ask how she knew his name, but something else caught his attention. A group of hazy, masked figures nearby. He asked who they were. Alden replied that, to keep things fair, all players had been given masks, so no one would know each other's identities. Knowing everyone was curious about what was next, Alden raised her arms and pointed to a planet nearby. At first glance, it looked like Earth, but Sunwon knew better. He had seen this world too many times to mistake it. It was the perished world. Alden declared that from this moment on, here in the boundless void surrounding the perished world, they would all become true gods. The game they had played until now was just a simulation, a preparation. But now, the real challenge was about to begin. Here, everything would change. Here, they would forge reality. Here, they would become gods. Clusters of humanoid figures stood silently across the vast platform, gathered in groups under a shroud of impenetrable darkness. No one spoke. The stillness was eerie, yet somehow fitting. Though Sunwo couldn't hear a single sound, he sensed the world around him through the delicate microfibers that picked up even the slightest vibrations. Some individuals stood completely alone, perhaps out of fear, or simply unwilling to mingle. The perished world was far more than a mere game. That much was clear to Sunwo as he observed the strange planet he'd found himself on. It bore an uncanny resemblance to Earth, right down to its familiar blue hue floating in space. But this world had been forsaken, left behind by its gods after tragedies too deep to mend. Once, this land teemed with life. A radiant civilization had blossomed here, where different species lived in harmony. Armored foxes built settlements. White weasels used as mounts, served with grace. Orcs, elves, and even platypuses collaborated in grand laboratories, pushing the boundaries of knowledge. It was a golden era, but peace didn't last. For reasons lost to time, the gods turned their backs on the planet. Terrified by the presence of dragons, creatures whose power rivaled their own, they fled into the cosmos, erasing all traces of themselves. In their absence, the world awaited new divinities. Now, all players gathered before a towering granite table, where Alden stood to explain the rules. The perished world had become a proving ground, a divine audition. At first, it was just a curiosity, an experimental game meant to ease boredom. But now, anyone with the courage to play could rise to godhood. At the outset, only the desperate, those who had lost everything, would believe in you. But with luck and strategy, your followers would grow. The one who earned the most devotion would ascend to become the sole deity of this forsaken world. The winner would have absolute control. No one would challenge the will of the supreme being. All desires, no matter how wild, could be realized. This offer sparkled with temptation, drawing in the greedy and the broken alike. Sunwo nodded slowly, but he noticed Alden was holding something back. He raised a hand. "What if I choose to surrender now?" he asked, his voice calm but curious. Alden responded evenly. "If you withdraw before the game begins, you'll be returned to your normal life. But all memories of this world will be erased. Your time here forgotten," Sunwo pressed further. "And if someone gives up mid-challenge? There's no exit once it begins," she said. "No turning back." He adjusted the skull of the Ulet resting on his head. "What if another player defeats me? What happens then?" "Then you'll meet a divine end," Alden replied. "The Watchers revel in such outcomes. It's a spectacle to them." Sunwo had expected as much. In a game where only one can claim victory, stakes this high were inevitable. And since this was no simulation, but something rooted in reality, losing meant far more than defeat. It meant death. That divine end was a sugar-coated term for annihilation. The rules were brutal. Only one survivor would reign supreme. There was no sense in quitting. Not now. Sunwo had more questions, but Alden raised a hand to halt him. The time for talking was over. Shuffling a stack of cards, she addressed the group. If anyone wishes to withdraw, now is your last chance. Inform the organizers immediately. She laid the cards out in front of them, face up. For those who accept the challenge, your journey begins now. Select your starting land. Just like in the original Perished World game, the first step was claiming a piece of territory, one small patch to rule and nurture. Around the table, murmurs rose. Doubt flickered in the eyes of a few participants. 5 players stepped back. They opted out, unwilling to risk everything. Cowards, perhaps, or simply realists. With their departure, only 27 contenders remained from the original 30. Alden turned to Sunwo. You may choose first. He raised an eyebrow at the unexpected honor, but didn't object. Shrugging, he stepped forward. The order didn't matter much. The territories all had randomized potential. It was luck and management that would decide their value. He picked the first card that caught his eye. Its blue back shimmered as he flipped it over. Instantly, a glowing circle of runes illuminated the ground beneath his feet. Without warning, the spell activated, teleporting him to the selected location. Once there, a new decision awaited. The choice of his first species and tribe to rule. The game had truly begun. The planet was stunning. Each continent carried its own charm, whether viewed separately or as part of the whole. The third continent, the largest of them all, lacked the natural wealth of the first and didn't enjoy the gentle weather of the second. Instead, it was a land marked by diversity, home to strange creatures, powerful monsters, and ancient ruins brimming with mysterious abilities. These ruins could shift the balance of power depending on how wisely they were used. Tools of fortune or downfall. Sunwo began his task by analyzing the new land he had been assigned. The region was a peninsula on the eastern edge of the third continent. A serene river flowed nearby, cutting through lush woods nestled in the hills. Frogs rested quietly in the water, their green skin barely rippling the surface. One of them, eyes locked on a fluttering blue butterfly, seemed ready to pounce. But the insect wasn't the target. Instead, the frog dove beneath the water and with agile hands snatched a large fish, its dinner. This was no ordinary frog, though. It was a frogman, a sentient being of this world. It held the fish high, triumphant, as another frogman shouted in celebration. Tonight, they would eat well. The butterfly, a new sight in these parts, was ignored, dismissed as a tasteless nuisance. Sunwo watched it all from a grand chair, surrounded by companions with blue glowing eyes. He contemplated the strange frogmen, primitive and peaceful, insectivores. According to the game, they were one of the weakest starting tribes, yet weakness was subjective. With the right approach, even they could become useful allies. His starting position on the eastern continent meant early conflict was unlikely. This region was calmer, giving him time to build power slowly. Aggressive strategies wouldn't pay off here. Instead, Sunwo welcomed the opportunity to nurture a peaceful race. These bug-eating frogmen seemed like a decent beginning. Still, something amused him: the sheer number of creatures. There were around 500 beings in this territory. That was a lot for an initial tribe, but not all of them belonged to the same species. They were too many and too varied to be easily managed. The Perished World game's mechanics revolved around faith. The stronger a creature's belief in its god, the more influence the player could wield over them. But 10 points of faith and 10 followers? That was a drop in the ocean, useless at this stage. Without advanced technology, there was little he could do. And so, Sunwo turned his eyes to the other options. He brought up another screen, revealing a group of lizard-like beings trudging through a vast, sun-scorched desert. These were lizardmen, tough, resilient, and also insectivores. Their scaly blue skin was marked by spotted patterns, and their group numbered around 30. It wasn't enough to form a strong tribe, but they looked hardy, born survivors of the wastelands. However, their numbers had clearly taken a hit. Among them were the elderly, the sick, and a gravely wounded lizardman who could barely keep up. He dragged himself at the back of the group, his body broken and spirit crushed. Whether cast down during a power struggle or simply the victim of cruel chance, he had clearly fallen from grace. But to Sunwo, this miserable figure wasn't a liability. He was an opportunity. Someone abandoned, desperate, and hopeless, was ripe for belief. If the lizard man longed for justice, redemption, or power, even a glimmer of divine intervention would push him toward faith. In pain and anger, he might even welcome a god, or a devil. Even though this lizard man was weak, his suffering made him the perfect seed for belief. A fragile beginning, yes, but far better than trying to sway contented frogmen. Sunwo made his decision. His allegiance would lie with the lizardmen, specifically with the outcast clinging to life at the tail of the group. This creature would be the first spark of worship, the first to see Sunwo as his god. And that was all he needed to begin. The desert offered no mercy. Each step beneath the blazing sun drained the energy from the lizardmen, especially the weakest among them. Those too frail to keep pace drifted to the rear of the group, with one injured lizardman falling far behind. His wound, poorly healed and worsened by malnutrition, throbbed with each step, his movements sluggish and labored. The entire group was barely hanging on, thin, exhausted, and gaunt. Their ribs protruded visibly, and even the strongest among them struggled to find prey in the lifeless terrain. The desert held little more than scattered birds and the occasional scurrying beast. Suddenly, a shout rose from the group. "Look! A gazelle!" Eyes widened with disbelief. It seemed too good to be true. But sure enough, ahead of them lay a wounded gazelle, its legs shattered and escape impossible. The lizardmen surged forward in a frenzy. One animal, 30 starving mouths. They tore into the creature without hesitation. Blood splashed onto the scorching sand as teeth and claws tore through skin and muscle. It wasn't a scene for the old. Or the injured. Those unable to compete simply sat off to the side, too exhausted to fight for a share. The healthy devoured the meat with desperate hunger, loud chewing and slurping echoing across the dunes. In moments, the carcass was picked clean. Only bones remained, but even those held value. The marrow within was still a source of life. One young lizardman reached for a bone, intending to savor what was left, but a female named Joel gently took it from him. She scolded him lightly and reminded the others that not everyone had the strength to hunt. Gathering the remains, she carried the pile to those who had sat out the feast, the injured, the old, the forgotten. In a place as unforgiving as the desert, weakness could easily mean death. Yet here was a small gesture of mercy, a rare kindness. The starving lizardmen received the bones with wide eyes and trembling hands. Saliva dripped as they gnawed on the remains and sucked the liquid marrow from the hollow centers. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them breathing. Off to the side, hidden behind a rock, sat the badly wounded lizard man. He clutched a bone tightly, his hand shaking as he chewed. Flies buzzed around his infected wound, but he barely noticed. The pain was worse. His name was Rockar. In his mind, this treatment made sense. Those who hunt should feast. Those who couldn't should be grateful for scraps. The group could have left him behind days ago. They still might. As the others chewed, conversations began to stir among the healthier lizardmen. Some glanced toward Joel and whispered, questioning her choice. One of them, blunt and without empathy, voiced what others were too polite to say. Rockar was dying. Everyone could see that. The infection was spreading. He should have been dead already, and yet he persisted. What made Rockar different wasn't just his stubborn will to live. It was what he had done for them. Not long ago, when a saber-toothed predator had appeared. Out of nowhere, it was Rockar who had stood his ground while the others fled. Alone, He had faced the beast and emerged alive, though badly wounded. His bravery had saved the rest. Without him, the group would have been massacred. These lizard men weren't part of a strong tribe. They were the cast-offs, the sick, the old, the rejected. Surviving in the desert was already nearly impossible. Rakkar had bought them time. That mattered, even now. Still, as food and water dwindled, desperation grew. Gratitude was fading. Some whispered of moving on without him. Others stayed silent, knowing it might soon come to that. In a world this harsh, even heroes could become burdens. In a world ruled by survival, harsh truths had to be accepted. Mercy had limits. Pouring precious resources into the weak only delayed the inevitable. Nature favored the strong, and the lizardmen knew this well. As night fell, the moon shone, bright, casting a soft glow across the land, gentle like a child's nightlight. The group gathered around some stones, choosing a spot to rest. Among them, Rakkar laid apart from the others, clutching a deep, pulsing wound. His uneasy slumber was soon interrupted by a soft fluttering near his ear. The iridescent glow of a morpho butterfly shimmered in the moonlight as it danced just above him. Annoyed, Rakkar stirred, swatting at the creature, but it didn't leave. It hovered persistently, circling his head. Its movements were deliberate, almost like it was urging him to follow. Drawn by its strange behavior, Rakkar rose quietly, trying not to wake the others. But his movements stirred them from their rest. They noticed him slipping away and watched in silence. Some assumed he was finally giving up, leaving them, relieving the group of the burden he had become. Still, they didn't stop him. They observed, curious about what he would do. Rakkar followed the butterfly up a nearby cliff, step by painful step. Jael, one of the others, watched thoughtfully as he climbed. Rakrak's body ached, yet he pressed forward, as if enchanted. Was this madness brought on by pain, a dying hallucination? Or was something truly calling to him? As he ascended higher, the truth revealed itself. There, clinging to the mountainside, was a sight that stole his breath. His eyes widened, jaw dropping in disbelief. A massive swarm of blue insects writhed together, forming what looked like a living appendage sprouting from the mountain itself. They didn't scatter. They didn't hide. They simply remained, crawling over each other, as if offering themselves. It was a feast. Enough food to nourish the entire tribe for days. At that very moment, a system notification appeared before Sunwo, confirming what had just happened. The Lizard Man Pack 11021 had witnessed a miracle. Relief washed over him. Alden had been right. The interface mirrored the one from Perished World. But here, it was real. Through faith points, he could now summon and control insects, not just as a game mechanic, but through divine will. The lizardmen stared in awe. This was no coincidence. This was providence. Sunwo, hidden behind his mask, exhaled a quiet, "Thank God." The first step had worked. The miracle was real, and it was enough. The swarm of bugs had answered their need. Now it was time to ensure that more would come. Nebula's next phase was already in motion. Different beetle swarms would appear regularly, near the tribe, sustaining them. Rakkar, filled with reverence, looked to the butterfly and spoke aloud, as though it were the orchestrator of this miracle. The others soon joined him, bowing their heads not just in thanks, but in recognition. Beings of high willpower could handle survival alone. Yes. But what use was pride when divinity itself offered salvation? Repeated miracles bred belief. Slowly, the lizard men began to associate these blessings with something greater, a force, a god. And so, the tribe gave it a name, the Beetle God. Sunwo chuckled silently. A beetle? Why not the butterfly? The name felt absurd. But then again, gods never started with perfect names. As civilizations evolved, So too did the titles of their deities. What mattered now was that belief had taken root. His presence had been felt, if not fully understood. This tribe, primitive yet devout, would become central to Nebula's future. Everything depended on how the next miracle unfolded, and at the center of it all stood Rakrak, the wounded protector, now chosen. By fate, or perhaps by the beetle god himself. A strange blue butterfly seemed to shadow their every step, fluttering ahead of the tribe no matter where they went. Rakra couldn't stop staring after it. Its movement stirred something in him. He was starting to see visions again. This time, he felt he shouldn't ignore them. While the others celebrated the sudden appearance of a swarm of insects, rejoicing at the gift of food, Rakra remained cautious. The bugs had arrived mysteriously, without any sign or warning, and something about that unsettled him. Rakra, are you going to chase after your hallucinations again? The lizard man at his side asked, half teasing, half worried. Winter loomed on the horizon, but curiously, the insects were coming from colder regions, a warning sign in itself. If the tribe followed that trail, they'd be heading toward frost and death. Cold was deadly for their kind. Though they had developed ways to endure winter, they were still descended from cold-blooded ancestors. In frigid weather, their movements slowed, food grew scarce, and they could only travel by daylight. Many didn't survive such conditions. The smart decision would have been to ignore the illusions and turn in a safer direction, especially for the sake of the sick and elderly. Yet Rakra believed there had to be a reason behind what he was seeing. What purpose could the visions serve in this barren, sandy wasteland? He couldn't say, but he knew somehow that he had to follow that butterfly. From above, Sunwon watched Rakra closely. He was one of the few who even acknowledged the divine at this early stage. The rest were skeptical, and for now there wasn't much Sunwon could do about it. He lacked the strength to bless anyone, at least until a follower reached the second level of belief. Still, Rakra pressed forward, carrying the child in his arms, leading the entire tribe after the butterfly. If only more of them had faith. They might find a future they never imagined. Higher and higher they climbed, and with every step, Rakra felt the weight of the moment growing. At last, they reached the mountain's peak, and there, stretched before them, was a landscape beyond words. The child in Rakra's arms squirmed with excitement, eager to explore. "Listen up, everyone!" the lizard man shouted. "The nameless bug god has brought us to a sacred land." It felt like a dream. Where once was desert, now there were green bushes and clear signs of life. At the hill's base, a spring gushed from the rocks. Lush trees and thick shrubs surrounded the water, small streams carving their way through the landscape. Mouths hung, open in awe. After so many days of suffering, they had finally found relief. Food, shelter, hope. The entire pack broke out into cheers, celebrating the miracle. Sunwon smiled to himself. Notifications flickered before his eyes. His divine rank had increased. The realm of the small beetle had reached the second level. It seemed minor, but now it meant he could bestow blessings. The protagonist, Sunwon, spoke, though only Rakra could feel his words. "Let me grant you strength. Let me speak through you. Be my priest," the voice said. A soft glow surrounded Rakra. Power surged into him. Though no one saw it, someone felt it. Night came quickly. The tribe divided their tasks. Hunters brought back food. Others set up camp, while the rest prepared a meal. Cooked meat brought warmth to their bellies, and for the first time in weeks, they went to sleep in peace. The fireflies danced over the camp. One beetle, bold and unafraid, flew up to Rakra and perched on his shoulder. A quiet voice stirred him from slumber. When he opened his eyes, he found himself kneeling in a vast white void. Everything was silent, except for the flutter of butterflies. Around him, bright, glowing, and in all shapes and sizes. Whenever one tried to land on his nose, he felt a voice calling his name again and again. Before him stood a figure, another lizardman, robed and mysterious. His face was hidden beneath a hood, his clawed hand extended toward Rakra. "Will you take my hand?" the figure asked, his voice calm and ancient. Could he be trusted? What did he want from a nameless outcast? Suddenly the hand pointed to Rakra, and he realized he was holding something heavy, a skull. Large, curved horns jutted from its sides. The hollow sockets and teeth were unmistakable. It was the skull of a water buffalo. Without hesitation, Rakra offered it to the figure, who placed it atop his own head. It was then that Rakra realized he was standing before the very presence of the nameless bug god. The dream faded into blackness. At dawn, Rakra woke and roused the camp. He shared his vision. The message was clear. The god wanted an offering. They were to sacrifice a water buffalo. But this was no simple task. To find one, they'd have to venture deep into the forest. It was dangerous. Joel, the former chief, voiced her concerns. "Who brought us here clearly wants tribute," she said. "But is it worth risking our lives? A buffalo hunt would endanger the whole pack." Everyone knew she was right. Hunting a water buffalo was no joke. It might require every hunter in the tribe, and if they left, who would protect the young and the old? Still, Rakra gripped his stone spear. "I'll go alone." The camp erupted in protest. That would be suicide, they said. One hunter couldn't possibly bring down a buffalo alone. But Rakra was no longer the same. He'd been blessed. The wound he once bore had vanished. His body had changed. His shoulders were now covered in a dark shell like beetle armor. Even Joel, as skeptical as she was, had to admit something supernatural had happened. Still, it wasn't just the healing. Rakra felt different, stronger, steadier. At the edge of the oasis, he approached a crooked palm tree. With one leg braced behind him, he launched his spear. The weapon tore through the air like lightning, slamming into the tree's trunk with such force that it split into splinters. Then the camp erupted into wild, stunned cheers. Even Joel remained quiet. All that was left of the tree was a gnarled stump, bristling with thorns sharp enough to snag and cling like burrs to anyone careless enough to touch it. Rayra picked up his spear and calmly walked back toward the tribe, his face unbothered, like nothing at all had happened. The moment he appeared, the tribe rushed toward him, overjoyed, peppering him with questions. How had he hidden such strength all this time? Even if the tree was long dead, to destroy it in a single strike was no small feat. Until recently, survival had been a daily struggle. But thanks to Rakrak, everything had changed. Not far from the celebratory crowd, the earth suddenly trembled. A herd thundered past, the vibrations humming through the oasis. Rakrak stepped forward and called everyone's attention to the sight. A herd of buffalo racing across the plain, a thick cloud of dust trailing behind them. The group was small, enough to make for manageable hunting, and they seemed to be heading slowly in the tribe's direction, drawn by the scent of water. But something was off. Buffalo herds typically never came this way. Their sudden appearance meant only one thing: they were lost. It was rare and mysterious, almost too perfectly timed. There was no reason to wait or let this opportunity slip away. Rakrak didn't hesitate. Spear in hand, he surged forward, ignoring shouts that tried to hold him back. This was their chance to break free from hunger. With precision and power, he hurled the same spear that had felled the thorny tree. It pierced the skull of the lead buffalo, dropping it instantly. The rest of the herd, startled, leapt over the fallen beast and vanished into the distance. The tribe cheered and ran to join him. Their god had blessed them, not just with insects, but with real meat. As they hauled the animal back to the village, they built a fire and prepared the feast. A thick pillar of smoke spiraled up into the sky, announcing to all that something sacred was happening here. In the center of the settlement, where bones had piled high over time, skulls of water buffalo hung solemnly, red streaks of blood trickling from their heads. This was the tribe's altar. And on this day, Rokrak, the priest chosen by the god, knelt in reverence and offered up their thanks. It wasn't about ritual perfection. Their prayer was simple. May the god accept their humble offering. Around him, the tribe bowed their heads, repeating his plea. Their ceremony was rough and unrefined, but the sincerity behind it mattered far more than polish. The god, Sun One, recognized that. And in return, the faith they poured into the act exceeded even the priest's expectations. For Rokrak, every effort suddenly felt worthwhile. It was all paying off. Sun One was not a god of lush pastures or civilized rituals. He was a wilderness god. If grass could not be created, then it could be destroyed to change nature's course. That was how the buffalo had been lured here. Locusts, guided by divine influence, stripped away paths and forced the herd toward the oasis. It wasn't herding, it was divine redirection. That evening, the tribe feasted once more. With each successful hunt, new parts of animals were added to the altar. Slowly, it transformed, becoming a towering monument several meters high. The altar stood majestic, a silent testament to the tribe's growing connection with their god. Besiin, morning came like any other, except for one thing. Jaol, walking through the center of the camp, saw Rokrak standing silently before the altar, eyes filled with worry. It had been years since the first altar was built. The lizardmen had changed too. Their once blue scales had all turned black, touched by the god's blessing. But last night, Rokrak had a dream, or perhaps a vision. He couldn't say for sure. It felt more like an oracle, though it left him deeply unsettled. Even the chieftain didn't know what to make of it. Bones rattled softly on the altar. The ground, once fertile, had dried to dust. Not even a fish stirred in the sacred pond. Still, they hadn't yet reached total desolation. This dream wasn't about the present. It was a warning of what was to come. The old chief believed the god would protect them. Rokrak had always trusted the chief, but this time he climbed the altar alone. Understanding the will of the divine was never easy, especially when its meaning felt just out of reach. That's why priests existed, to interpret, to guide. The chief feared only one thing. Sitting at the peak of the altar, he tried to recall the first crude structure they'd ever built. Only the landscape remained unchanged since those early days. Today, though, the view held something dreadful, a silhouette on the horizon that chilled him. It was then that he called Jaol to his side, asking for her insight. The trembling of the altar now made sense. The tribe they had once driven away was returning. A massive yellow beast lumbered forward, carrying a figure that immediately drew attention. It resembled an enormous gecko, but this creature wasn't the most surprising thing. Atop its back sat someone unforgettable. Rayra recognized him instantly. Bor was impossible to forget. He hadn't changed much since Rayra's group had been exiled from the tribe. Towering at over 2 meters tall, Bor's massive frame made the other lizardmen around him look like children. But it wasn't just his size. His scales still carried the deep blue hue that once defined the Rokrak village, a color now rare. And somehow, impossibly, Bor had tamed and ridden this monstrous reptile. As more figures appeared behind him, it became clear that this wasn't a small scouting party. The entire tribe had shown up. That could only mean one thing. Their swamp homeland was gone, likely consumed by the rampaging Manon. The devastation must have been absolute, but there was still a chance. This hidden oasis was surrounded by tall cliffs, nearly invisible unless someone climbed high enough. Maybe, just maybe, the intruders wouldn't discover it. G quickly whispered this possibility to the chieftain, Ed. Their quiet discussion was suddenly interrupted by a sharp call echoing from a nearby cliff. A bold voice declared the area sacred. belonging to the nameless beetle god. The bluish-skinned tribe was warned not to advance any further. The speaker was one of the settlement's own lizard men, standing tall and proud as he addressed the visitors. Jael felt a knot of embarrassment tighten in her chest. Today's patrol had been led by Ur, her subordinate, and now they had drawn unwanted attention to their hidden refuge. She was ready to melt from shame. Rakra gently patted her on the shoulder. "Maybe it's the will of the god," he said calmly, retrieving a nearby spear and checking its condition. G followed him down the slope. Perhaps this strange meeting wasn't a coincidence. Maybe the nameless god had orchestrated it as a trial, but Chief Sunwoo had a different interpretation. This wasn't a test. It was a calling, a mission, a chance to welcome back those who had once been cast out. Despite Boar's overwhelming presence and his fearsome mount, perhaps he was now ready to change, maybe even lead differently. A delicate morpho butterfly fluttered into view, landing gently nearby. To Sunwoo, its appearance was always a sign. Was this divine confirmation? He dared not draw conclusions. Instead, he focused on what he could do. Rakra understood his chief's resolve. The blue-skinned tribe and Rayra's people needed each other now, for survival, for progress, for the continuation of their culture. By the looks of the newcomers, it was clear their home had been abandoned. They were refugees in need of sanctuary. This was a chance to show them the truth and power of the beetle god. However, Rakra's decision to act unilaterally, without consulting the rest of the tribe, seemed odd to some. But the answer might lie in his personal strength. With a willpower, rating of 14, Rakra had the courage to act decisively, even in complex situations. That kind of leadership could be a blessing or a liability. Still, if Sunwoo could use such inner strength to deepen the tribe's faith, then change would come, even faster than anticipated. Rather than controlling every detail, instilling purpose and trust in the people might be the better path. As Rakra approached the cliff where the enemy patrol stood guard, the tribe's boldest leader shouted up, "Do you live here, little ones?" He taunted, clearly unaware these black-scaled lizardmen were once part of the very group he had exiled. The patrol bristled. Rage simmered beneath the surface. How dare this braggart mock them and take interest in their land? Still, Boar was unfazed. He pressed on with his questions, demanding to know why they lived in such a wasteland. But Rakra stepped forward, flanked by his kin, and declared with pride, "This land belongs to the Avatar, the bug god whom you refuse to name." The Sai. Stranger squinted at him, unsure if he understood what was being said. It didn't matter. The arrogance in his voice remained. He warned the settlement to vacate the land immediately. If they obeyed, they would be spared. If not, he promised violence. He had no idea how many defenders remained hidden, but he seemed confident his warriors would win. A true leader, Boar sneered, should know how to pick his battles. But Rayra wasn't eager for bloodshed. He believed in strength, yes, but he didn't seek war. The blessing he carried made him confident, not reckless. Still, this answer didn't satisfy the enemy leader. He wanted conflict. Rayra raised his spear and stepped forward, addressing the intruders. "The blue-skinned ones who lost their home may come now. Let them join us in the house of our god. He will decide their place." The enemy laughed in disbelief. "You don't even know how to play the game," he mocked, yanking the reins of the beast beneath him. "You really think some bug god is going to protect you?" But he didn't know what this so-called bug god was capable of. The arrogance in his voice gave way to rage. "Kill them!" he shouted. The beast's eyes flared with wild light. With a roar, it charged down the slope, straight at Rakra, who stood firm, his spear raised, ready to defend his home. Rayra stood tall at the front of his group, unwavering in his resolve to protect them, even if it meant death. From atop his monstrous beast, Boar gave the command with a shout, striking the reins across Manon's back. Facing his enemy head-on was a privilege, not a burden for Rakra. As the tribe's chieftain, it was an honor to meet his adversary face to face. All he asked of himself in that moment was enough courage and strength to see the battle through. The enormous creature that Bor rode lashed out with one colossal paw, shattering Rakra's spear like it was twigs. The blow was powerful, driven by raw muscle. It was foolish, Bor believed, for any tribe leader to be so reckless. As the beast raised its claw again, intending to crush Rakra, the sheer size of it cast a shadow that swallowed his entire frame, blotting out the sun. It was a clash not just of individuals but of worlds. Two civilizations collided, and the impact brought with it an unexpected gift. Both sides earned experience. Sunwo, who had long focused his divine attention on a single tribe, now found himself at the helm of a new challenge. The lizard folk of this region had become his first-tier tribes. New talents, new developments, and yes, even new skills became accessible to him. Naturally, he chose to unlock them. Meanwhile, the fight raged on. A violent swipe tore through the air where Rakra had been standing, leaving Bor grinning triumphantly. But when the creature lifted its foot, expecting a lifeless body beneath it, what emerged was the tribe leader, unharmed, alive and already moving. He rolled to the side, untouched. Something had shifted. Sunwo had seized direct control. Rakra gazed down at his transformed body. Black scales shimmered in the light. His claws were longer than his forearm joints, and his elongated snout jutted into view. His form was no longer his own. It was a vessel of divine will. Bor was left bewildered, unable to comprehend how his enemy had survived, but he wasn't about to hesitate again. He ordered Manon to strike once more, but to the lizard men witnessing this, Rakra was no longer the same leader. He had been overtaken, empowered by something greater. His mind was now fused with his gods. Opening the status panel, Sunwo reviewed the current stats. Bor, a member of the blue-scaled tribe, had decent attributes, a level 1 warrior and level 2 leader. His strength was 24, intelligence 15, and social aptitude 16. His one unique ability was breeding. By all accounts, one Rakra should have been enough to bring him down. The true danger lay in Bor's monstrous drake, Manon, a creature with a whopping 87 strength, though its intelligence and social stats lagged far behind. Rakra, on the other hand, stood on a different level entirely. As chieftain of his namesake tribe, he was both a level 2 warrior and tribe leader, with the added distinction of being a level 1 priest. His stats reflected this: strength 30, intelligence 24, social skill 26, and a commanding will of 14. But the most important factor was his status as a third-rank saint, a divine anomaly. With those blessings, victory was not just possible, it was expected. Launching himself from his stance, Rakra closed the distance in a blink, leaping toward Manon's head. He activated one of Sunwo's strongest skills, the Avatar ability. This power granted him access to a new attribute: divinity. Class DA single unit of divinity was equivalent to 100 times the natural energy any being could hold, and Rakra now wielded it. Put simply, Rayra now held an astonishing 63 units of divine power. For anyone lacking a similar level of divinity, a fight against him, or rather against a god, was utterly hopeless. With a single hand, he gripped the beast's massive jaw, and using sheer force, hurled it into the air. The creature flipped mid-air and crashed down, right on top of its own master. The gap in strength was beyond comprehension. Those fortunate or unfortunate enough to witness it were struck dumb. The tremor from the impact felt like it shook the bones of the world. Several blue-scaled lizardmen were thrown off their feet just from the shockwave. Sunwon could have torn Manon apart, reduced him to a heap of blood and broken scales, but that kind of spectacle would likely cause more terror than admiration. Even those who had already seen Rera crush a tree in a single blow were left in awe. Now pinned under his own beast, Manon was done. The fight was over, and everyone could see it. Rakra himself could barely believe what he was seeing. Even Joel, normally composed, stood motionless in stunned recognition of the display. As some of the lizard folk moved closer to Rera, full of admiration and reverence, Joel held up her hand, blocking their path. There was still unfinished business. Bor was alive. To him, everything happening felt like a twisted joke. He was convinced Rera had cheated, used some dirty trick or illusion to pull off the impossible. When Manon had been flipped, a knife had fallen from his belt and landed within arm's reach. Shoving off the beast's weight, Bor seized the blade and scrambled toward Rera, shouting for his warriors not to let their guard down. His strategy was always reliable. This time, though, it would fail. Rera made a simple gesture, just one, and in an instant, Bor was struck. The slap snapped his head sideways. His legs gave out, and he dropped to the earth. Silence fell like a blanket over the blue-scaled tribe. What they had just witnessed was undeniable, absolute power. There were murmurs among the lizardmen. Quiet. Terrified voices suggesting there was no hope left for them. They could no longer imagine resisting. Who's next? Rera's voice rang out as he cast his gaze across the trembling warriors. No one answered. Instead, weapons clattered to the ground. All at once, the warriors knelt and bowed their heads in submission, pledging loyalty to their new leader. It was finished. And still, Rakra could hardly believe what had happened. He stared down at his own hands, as if seeing them for the first time. The avatar had only borrowed his body for a moment, but it had left something behind, an untamed energy, a primal awe, like waking from a dream that was too real to forget. Sun One sat comfortably on his divine throne, watching the outcomes unfold among his chosen people. The tribe, having welcomed the newcomers into their faith, made no mention of the recent battle. Everyone had shelter. Everyone had food. The warmth of unity pushed the memory of the conflict into the background. One of the young members curiously asked whether these newcomers were the same tribe members who had vanished into the wilds long ago. It was a fair question. Their skin now bore a strikingly different hue. The change wasn't just cosmetic. Following the blue-scaled god's nameless avatar had transformed them in body and in spirit. They had grown stronger. Without that transformation, they would never have survived. The harshness of the desert. The god who had found them had become their salvation, and his power was undeniable. Not far from the campfire, Joel and Rakra spoke in hushed tones, their discussion serious. Joel was deeply concerned. The influx of new people, nearly 6 times their original population, meant that the oasis couldn't sustain them for long. Its resources were already dwindling. They couldn't remain here much longer. No one would want to return to the endless desert, not after tasting the beauty and peace of this place. But we can't just wander aimlessly, Joel said. There must be a purpose, a direction. Rakra turned his head slowly, as if listening to something far off. He didn't have an answer, not one he could clearly explain, but one thought stayed with him. Their god had not forsaken them. The answer had already been given. Perhaps it had arrived with the newcomers. The blue-scaled tribe and their own had long been separated, living apart. But now, perhaps it was time to reunite. The blues had greater numbers, perhaps even someone wise, enough to chart the path ahead.